Welcome back to The Spirits Educator. My name is Brian Donnelly. The Spirits Educator is a digital education platform and trade resource for the distilled spirits industry. My goal is to provide in-depth spirits information, brand transparency, and category education for distributor sales teams, hospitality and service industry members, and motivated enthusiasts. I currently work for a major wine and spirits distributor, and my work here on The Spirits Educator is completely unaffiliated with my current employer. Today I'm going to be covering the Old Forester brand. I'm going to reference a script that I wrote so that I have all the information correct and in front of me. If you would like to access the written content, you can find it on my website, and I'll include a link below. First, I'm going to start with the history of the brand. George Garvin Brown was born in Munfordville, Kentucky on September 2nd, 1846. Educated in Louisville, he began working at a wholesale drug company called Henry Chambers and Company. While working as a pharmaceutical rep, Brown noticed that doctors were constantly complaining about the unreliable quality of current medicinal whiskeys. Now keep in mind, this was the mid-1800s, and medicinal whiskey was very much an essential tool for doctors. That led Brown to create his whiskey in 1870, a blend of whiskey from 3 different local distilleries. Brown's whiskey was the first American whiskey to be sold commercially, in individually packaged and sealed bottles to ensure customers of its quality. The trademark phrase, "first bottled bourbon," still appears on each bottle of Old Forester. Dr. William Forester, spelled with 2 R's, was a well-known doctor in Louisville, and he allowed his name to be used on the label to signify the whiskey's consistency and quality. When Dr. Forester retired, the second R was dropped from the brand's name, and Old Forester, spelled with 1 R, is still spelled the same way today. Besides being the first bottled bourbon, Old Forester's other significant claim to fame is being one of 6 Kentucky distilleries to legally produce whiskey under a medicinal license during the 13 years of Prohibition. If this subject matter interests you, check out Chuck Crowley's article linked below about medicinal whiskey produced during Prohibition. His blog is an incredible resource for anyone who wants to go down a rabbit hole on this exciting topic in the world of American whiskey. Thanks to Owsley Brown, the son of George Garvin Brown, Brown-Forman is the only one of those 6 companies that still exist today, and there is still a member of the Brown family leading the organization. Old Forester remains the only bourbon brand continuously sold by the same company before, during, and after Prohibition. When it comes to talking about Old Forester's parent company, Brown-Forman, it doesn't take long before the topic of barrels comes up. Brown-Forman is one, if not the only, spirit supplier that owns and operates their own cooperages. This dates back to 1945 when Brown-Forman purchased a furniture company and created the Bluegrass Cooperage to make custom bourbon barrels. The first barrel was produced in 1946, and the company is now the Brown-Forman Cooperage. It's the company's goal to own the entire whiskey making process from distillery, maturation, to bottling. Since the vast majority of whiskey's flavor and all of its color comes from the barrel, it's clear why barrel making is vital to Brown-Forman. The new Old Forester distillery on Historic Whiskey Row in downtown Louisville is a $45 million, 70,000 square foot, fully operational and active distillery. This facility has a 24-inch Vendome still that will distill 100,000 proof gallons of whiskey per year and process 4,500 gallons of mash per day. The facility even has a fully operational cooperage with a capacity of 26 barrels per day. The on-site warehouse will age up to 900 barrels, and the remaining barrels will be aged at the Brown-Forman distillery. If you're going to be in Louisville, I highly recommend touring the facility. It's definitely worth the time. Next, let's talk the production process. All expressions except the rye have the same mash bill. The mash bill for Old Forester bourbon is 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley. If you're unfamiliar with the term mash bill, it's simply the proportion of grains from which the whiskey is fermented and distilled. Without getting too technical, bourbon is typically produced from a mash bill of corn, rye, and malted barley, unless it's a wheated bourbon like Maker's Mark or Weller that swaps out the rye for wheat. One of the many legally defining rules for bourbon is that it has to be produced from a mash bill of at least 51% corn, but usually the percentage of corn is much higher. I will go into more detail about the legal specifications of distilling bourbon, rye, and Tennessee whiskey in a later video. Now let's talk water, because it's a crucial flavor building block just like the mash bill. Old Forester uses purified water to proof down their whiskey before maturing and before bottling. Like Brown-Forman's other famous bourbon brand, Woodford Reserve, many Kentucky bourbons use limestone-filtered spring water as their water of choice. This is because this water is full of rich minerals such as magnesium, zinc, and potassium, which are all vital for the fermentation process. Plus, the limestone naturally filters out iron, which could ruin the flavor of the bourbon. Water is used consistently throughout the whiskey production process, so this is one of many decisions producers can make to dial in their desired flavor profile. A brand's recipe is the combination of its signature mash bill and proprietary yeast strain. Old Forester uses a proprietary yeast strain called 1B with about 20% sour mash, and it is used exclusively for the Old Forester brand. If you're unfamiliar with sour mashing, sometimes referred to as backset, it's the technique used to increase the liquid's acidity that will be fermented by adding the acidic residue that comes out of the base of the beer still after distillation. The fermentation process for Old Forester usually lasts between 3 and 5 days, which seems relatively standard for the category. Each one of Brown-Forman's bourbon brands has its own recipe. This allows the master distiller to use the combination of mash bill and yeast as different building blocks in order to achieve their desired final flavor profile. Next, Old Forester is double distilled in a copper column beer still made by Vendome Copper and Brass in Louisville, who makes almost all the stills used in the commercial bourbon industry. The new make spirit, or White Dog, comes off the still of about 140 proof or 70% ABV, and is cut to 120 proof or 62.5% ABV before entering the charred New American White Oak barrel. All barrels used for Old Forester will come exclusively from the Brown-Forman cooperage. Old Forester, along with Woodford Reserve, both age their barrels in temperature-controlled warehouses. This technique is credited to Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr., who invented the technology of steam-heated cycled rack houses. Most Kentucky distillers do not heat cycle their aging facilities, but instead use a traditional open-air rack house, which are hot in the summer and cold in the winter. I will explain the different maturation techniques used for each expression when I explain each product in the family of brands. First, we'll start with the Core series. The Old Forester Core lineup is the 8600 and Rye. The 86 is the entry-level expression in the brand lineup and won my pick for the best bourbon under $20. I did an analytical tasting of 14 bourbons and found the Old Forester 86 to be the best option under $20, hands down. The 86 and 100 expression are named for their bottling proof and are fantastic cocktail bourbons that give consumers a lot of value for their money. The rye mash bill is 65% rye, 15% corn, and 20% malted barley. The brand reintroduced an historic rye recipe from the Normandy Rye whiskey brand acquired in 1940 by former Brown-Forman president Owsley Brown. Line price with the Old Forester 100 proof, this product is one of the most fantastic American rye whiskeys at this price point. Unfortunately, Brown-Forman underestimated just how popular this product would be, and demand quickly exceeded supply, so the company had to allocate this product in most major markets. This product is bottled at 100 proof or 50% ABV. Next, I'm going to talk about the Whiskey Row series. The Whiskey Row series is fascinating because each expression represents a milestone in the brand's history, which obviously also parallels the bourbon category as a whole. The first expression in the Old Forester Whiskey Row series was the 1870 original batch. This expression echoes the quality and consistency of George Garvin Brown's original bottled bourbon in 1870. Brown achieved quality by being the first person to sell his whiskey exclusively in a sealed glass bottle. He reached consistency by sourcing his whiskey from 3 different distilleries and blended the 3 to achieve a consistent product every time. To emulate the original batching process from 1870, 7 barrels are selected from 3 different warehouses, then mingled together, similar to the process that would have been available to Brown. This expression is minimally filtered and bottled at 90 proof or 45% ABV. The second expression in the Whiskey Row series is the Old Forester 1870 Bottled and Bond. This expression mingles fewer than 100 barrels and pays homage to the U.S. Bottled and Bond Act of 1879. But what exactly does bottled and bond mean? Qualifying whiskey must be from a single distillery, and the bottle produced must come from the same distilling season, either January 1st to June 30th or July 1st to December 31st. It must be aged for a minimum 4 years in a wooden container and bottled at 100 proof or 50% ABV. This is a labeling term frequently seen on whiskey, but not limited to whiskey. Other spirit categories can also be labeled bottled and bond. Now, the risk of buying rock gut whiskey no longer is a grave threat to consumers, but by buying a bottle and bond label of whiskey, you're still being guaranteed that the product you just purchased meets some base level of quality. In my Best Bourbon series, I named the Old Forester 1879 as the best bourbon between $40 and $50 among a competitive set of 10 different options. The third expression in the Whiskey Row series is the Old Forester 1910 Old Fine Whiskey. In October of 1910, a fire broke out on Whiskey Row and caused the Old Forester distillery to shut down in the middle of bottling. The distillery had a tank full of fully mature 100 proof whiskey that could not be bottled when the distillery felt the product was ready. Instead, they aged the whiskey in a second, new, heavily charred barrel and sold it as a product called Very Fine Old Whiskey. Brown-Forman claims this is the first documented double-barreled bourbon. According to Old Forester's former master taster, Jackie Zykan, a standard Old Forester barrel receives about 22 seconds of char, while the second barrel used in 1910 receives more than double that, about 50 seconds. The bourbon is rested between 7 and 9 months in the second barrel and bottled at 93 proof or 46.5% ABV. The final expression in the Whiskey Row series is the 1920 Prohibition style. This expression pays tribute to another important event in bourbon's history, the Volstead Act of 1920, which initiated the 13 years of Prohibition. While the commercial production of alcohol was prohibited, Old Forester was one of 6 Kentucky distilleries that could legally produce whiskey under a medicinal license. The distillery held Kentucky Permit Number 3. At this time, the barrel entry proof for Old Forester was 100 proof. During the maturation process, the evaporation, which is also known as the angel share, increased the aging whiskey's barrel proof, which ended up around 115 proof or 57.5% ABV. This expression is minimally filtered for maximum taste and represents a vintage example of barrel strength whiskey. Going beyond the Whiskey Row series, there is another product called the Old Forester Statesman. The Old Forester Statesman is perhaps the best value and least known option in the family of brands. The brand came from a partnership between Brown-Forman and 20th Century Fox for the 2017 film sequel Kingsman: The Golden Circle. The barrels used for this expression are hand-selected from the warmest parts of the rack house. Since Old Forester heat cycles their rack houses, the barrels are in uniform condition, but some secret hotspots yield intense character and bold flavor. In my Best Bourbon series, the Statesman was one of my top picks for bourbons between $50 and $75. This product is bottled at 95 proof or 47.5% ABV. The final expression from Old Forester is perhaps its most famous and most coveted expression, and that's Old Forester Birthday Bourbon. First released in 2002, this highly limited expression is released annually on September 2nd to celebrate the birthday of the brand's founder, George Garvin Brown. The master distiller and master taster select older barrels that show exceptional character during a tasting panel. The age statement and bottling proof will vary each year. I will link below Old Forester's website, which detailed information on each year's birthday bourbon release. If you read the brand write-up for this I have on my website, you'll be able to find links to all the different birthday bourbon expressions with all the details of each release. The Old Forester brand continues to deliver history, value, and innovation to their customers. And in the words of George Garvin Brown, there is nothing better in the market. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. If you would like to support this channel, please consider becoming a Patreon member. I will have a link below of how to join. And as always, please drink responsibly.